Didn't expect the paramedic to show up at checkout, she said, eyes finding mine across the threshold. I looked her over once. Slowly. Didn't expect the hotel owner to answer the door like that. She tilted her head. I twisted my ankle. A small smile. Carry me. I picked her up without a word. Before we begin, has someone ever said exactly the wrong thing at exactly the right moment and completely rearranged your plans? Drop it in the comments, subscribe, and let's begin. My name is Tate Calloway. Paramedic, 11 years running, out of Station 4 in Cedar Falls, Colorado, a mountain town most people drive through on their way somewhere bigger, and that the rest of us would never leave. People here don't call 911 and wonder who's coming. They call and say, "Oh good, Tate's on shift." I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you because what happened to me last May would have gone differently if I were the kind of man who keeps his head down and his mouth shut. Which I am not. And which is, depending on the day, either my best or worst quality. Cedar Falls in mid-May is something else. The snow retreats off the peaks and leaves green wherever it pulls back. Wildflowers come in overnight, like they've been waiting underground with their coats on. The air smells like cold pine and something sweet you can never quite name. That Tuesday I was finishing a shift handoff around 4, jacket over my arm, keys in hand, thinking about nothing, probably whether I had eggs at home, when the sky changed. It happens fast up here. 1 minute clear, the next the mountains are wearing clouds, and before you've had time to wonder about it, the storm is on top of you. A warm May storm doesn't threaten you. It just arrives, dark gray off the peaks, temperature dropping 5 degrees in minutes, cottonwood seeds that had been floating lazily through the afternoon suddenly whipping sideways in the gusts. I was cutting across Main Street on foot when I saw her. Far curb, corner of Maple and Main. Blazer over one arm, white shirt sleeves rolled up, phone pressed hard against her ear. The wind was doing something dramatic with her hair, pale blonde, shoulder length, the kind of color that makes you think of winter light, and she was fighting it one-handed, losing, not caring. Everybody in Cedar Falls knew who she was. Reeve Weston. Owner of the Weston Mountain Lodge up on the East Ridge, glass and timber, the most reviewed boutique hotel in the county. She'd built that reputation through stubbornness, taste, and an absolute refusal to accept limitations. She moved through Main Street like a hawk moves through open air, efficient, purposeful, not particularly interested in conversation. I hadn't spoken more than 4 words to her in my life. I wasn't planning on changing that. I was watching the way you watch something impressive that isn't your concern, until I saw her step off the curb. Her heel caught in the gap where the concrete had buckled at the crosswalk edge. I knew that gap. I'd flagged it to the town council twice. Both times I got a form email about budget timelines. Her ankle rolled, all the way over. She went down hard on one knee, catching herself on the wet asphalt with a short, sharp breath forced out of her. I was moving before I'd decided to. 11 years of reflex, your body goes while your mind catches up. I was at her side in 5 seconds. She was already trying to stand. "Don't," I said, same voice I use at accident scenes. Not unkind. Just waited. She looked up from the sidewalk with rain on her face and an expression I would come to know well, pride, annoyance, and a tightly controlled desire to be anywhere else. She lowered the phone. "I'm fine. You rolled that ankle completely over. Let me look." She stood anyway. Made exactly 1 step before her face went white and she grabbed the "No parking" sign to stay upright. "Okay," she said quietly. "Maybe not entirely fine. 30 seconds of assessment, not broken, badly sprained, needed elevation and ice. Urgent care was 20 minutes down the valley in worsening conditions." "My apartment is half a block away," I said. "I can wrap it properly, get ice on it. You can reassess in an hour." She stared at me. "I have a board call in 40 minutes. You can make it from my armchair." I've got Wi-Fi. I could see her running the math, options, logistics, indignity versus practicality. She wasn't a woman who decided slowly. Just carefully. Fine, she said. She took my arm. Made it 20 steps before the ankle buckled again and I caught her. Then I made the offer she would later claim, laughing, hand over her eyes, was the most presumptuous thing anyone had ever said to her. I'm going to carry you. She looked at me like I'd suggested something illegal. You weigh about 130 pounds, I said. I carry heavier equipment up 4 flights regularly. Your dignity will survive. Silence. Rain. A shop door rattling down the block. If you tell anyone, she said, I will deny everything. Fair enough. And I picked her up. My apartment on Oak Street is not impressive. I want to be upfront about that. It's a ground floor 1-bedroom with second-hand furniture, a kitchen that's more functional than aesthetic, and a view of the parking lot that I've never once looked at intentionally. What it does have is a good armchair, wide, worn leather, positioned near the window where the honeysuckle comes in through the crack in the frame in spring, and a freezer that, as it turned out, had exactly 1 bag of frozen peas. I set Reeve down on the couch, got the peas wrapped in a dish towel, and elevated her ankle on the armrest before she'd had a chance to object to any of it. She looked around my apartment with the careful, neutral expression of someone who has been trained not to react to things. It's clean, she said finally. High praise, I said. The ghost of something crossed her face. Not quite a smile. Clothes. I gave her the armchair for the call, better back support, and she looked like someone who'd been carrying herself rigidly upright for about 6 hours straight. She transferred to it without complaint, which told me the ankle hurt more than she was letting on. I made coffee, stayed in the kitchen, and tried to give her what privacy I could in 800 square feet. The calls started at 4:40. I wasn't trying to listen. But the kitchen in my apartment is not a separate room so much as a suggestion of one, and within 2 minutes it was clear that whatever was happening on the other end of that phone was not going well. I heard names. Ashby, clipped, impatient, the kind of voice that belongs to someone who charges by the hour. A woman named Carla who spoke in figures. And beneath them both, steady and controlled, Reeve. She was good. I'll say that immediately. She didn't raise her voice. She had numbers ready, counterpoints ready, and she delivered them the way you deliver something you've rehearsed so many times it no longer feels like rehearsing. But I could hear it, the slight tightening when Ashby cut her off, the half-second pause before she responded to Carla's figures, the way her sentences got shorter as the call went on. Then Ashby said it. Reeve, with respect, you're too emotionally attached to this staff to make objective decisions. The board needs leadership that can execute. I put down my coffee cup. The silence from the armchair lasted exactly 3 seconds. These people have been with the lodge for an average of 6 years, Reeve said. Their retention is directly tied to our repeat guest rate, which is 43%, 12 points above the regional average. That's not emotion. That's a balance sheet. A 20% staff reduction recovers the Q3 shortfall, Carla said. The numbers are clean. The numbers are clean because they don't account for rehiring costs, onboarding time, or the service drop that follows turnover in a property like ours. I've modeled it. I can send the full. We've seen your model, Ashby said. The board isn't convinced. Another silence. Shorter this time. Then, without entirely meaning to, I spoke. Ask them what their comparable retention figures look like across the rest of the portfolio. Reeve turned and looked at me over the back of the armchair. Her expression was unreadable. I leaned against the kitchen counter. I'd been called presumptuous twice in one afternoon already. No point stopping. She held my gaze for a moment, then turned back. What does retention look like across comparable properties in the portfolio, Ashby? A pause on the line. That's not relevant to. It's directly relevant, she said, and something in her voice had shifted, steadier now, like she'd found a handhold. If the lodge is an outlier, I want to understand the baseline we're being compared against. Ashby's response was smooth and immediate and said almost nothing. Which, in my experience, means the answer would have been inconvenient. The call ended 11 minutes later with what Ashby called an action item, which I recognized as a deadline wearing a polite disguise. Reeve had 10 days to deliver a revised staffing plan or the board would implement their own. The line went quiet. She set the phone face down on her knee and looked out the window at the rain, which had softened to a steady murmur against the glass. I waited. Some people need a moment before they want words around them. They're going to cut 20% regardless, she said. Not to me, exactly. Just out loud. Maybe, I said. Or maybe they're waiting to see if you'll fight. She looked at me then, really looked, the way she hadn't quite allowed herself to yet. Like she was deciding something. You're the paramedic, she said. Tate Calloway. That's me. You flagged that sidewalk gap to the council. I blinked. Twice, yeah. I know, she said. I was at the April meeting. I seconded the motion to expedite the repair. It failed 4-2. She paused. I'm sorry you went unheard. I didn't have an answer for that. So I poured her a second cup of coffee and sat down across from her, and we talked until the rain stopped. I showed up at the Weston Mountain Lodge the next morning at 8:15 with a thermos of coffee, my personal phone, and what Reeve would later describe as an unreasonable amount of confidence for someone who wasn't invited. She was standing at the front desk going over reservation reports when I walked through the lobby doors. She looked up, looked at my thermos, looked at my face, and said nothing for a moment. You have 3 days of off-shift time this week, I said. So do I. Let me help you build the case. She studied me the way she'd looked at me the night before, that careful, deciding look. Her ankle was wrapped and she was moving on it gingerly, and I had the sense she'd been up since 5. You know nothing about hotel finances, she said. No, I agreed. But I know people. And I know how to make someone trust a camera. Another pause. Then she stepped out from behind the desk. I'll get you a visitor badge. The lodge was something else in the morning light. I'd driven past it 100 times on the Ridge Road but never been inside. It wasn't exactly a paramedic's regular haunt. Tall windows, timber beams, the kind of quiet that feels earned rather than empty. The valley spread out below the glass like something painted. I understood, standing there, why she fought for it the way she did. We started with Maria. She was the head chef, mid-50s, originally from Puebla, had been at the lodge for 9 years. I found her in the kitchen at 8:30 prepping for the breakfast service, moving with the calm efficiency of someone who has done this so many times that the work has become a kind of language. I asked if I could film her for 2 minutes. She wiped her hands on her apron, looked at Reeve, who nodded, and then looked back at me with the appraising expression of a woman who has raised children and is not easily charmed. What do you want me to say? She asked. Nothing specific, I said. Just tell me about a regular. Someone you know by order. She thought for about 4 seconds. Then she told me about the couple from Albuquerque, married 40 years, came every spring for their anniversary, always the corner table by the east window. The husband took his eggs over easy with the green chili on the side because it upset his stomach otherwise, and Maria had started keeping a note in the reservation file so it was ready before he asked. Last year he'd had a minor health scare and they'd nearly cancelled. When they arrived, Maria had left a small arrangement of wildflowers on the table with a card that said "Glad you made it." The wife had cried. I stopped the recording. 90 seconds. I didn't need more. Danny was next, 23, front desk, the kind of effortless warmth that you can't train into people and can't afford to lose. He talked about the solo travelers, the ones who came up from the city looking tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix, and how he'd learned to read the difference between someone who wanted efficient check-in and someone who needed 30 seconds of being genuinely seen. He kept a short list of local trail recommendations tailored to fitness level and mood. He'd started it himself, on his own time, because he noticed guests asking and not knowing where to direct them. I filmed 6 people over 2 days. The groundskeeper who'd replanted the stone garden after the hail damage last August, working weekends without being asked. The housekeeper who left handwritten notes for guests celebrating birthdays. The maintenance man who'd driven 40 minutes in a January snowstorm to rescue a family stranded on the Ridge Road, off the clock, in his own truck, because that's what you did. Each night I sat with Reeve at the long table in the lodge's back office while she built her financial counterproposal. Energy savings from the new HVAC she'd pushed through in February. Local vendor contracts that cut supply costs 11%. Shoulder season packages she'd been developing for 6 months, projected to fill a traditionally dead period. She worked with the focused intensity of someone who has stopped being afraid and started being angry, which, in my experience, is when people do their best work. On the second night, somewhere around 10 o'clock, she set her pen down and said, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why are you doing this?" I thought about it honestly. "Because Ashby said you were too emotional to make objective decisions," I said. "And that bothered me more than it should have, considering I'd known you for about 6 hours." She looked at me for a long moment. Outside the window, the valley was dark and very still, the kind of quiet that settles over mountain towns after 9. "It bothered me too," she said. "It always does." She paused. "My father built this place. He sold it before it became what it is. He needed the money and didn't believe in it enough to wait. I bought it back 8 years ago. The board knows that. Ashby thinks it makes me sentimental. Does it? It makes me careful," she said. "There's a difference." I didn't argue with that. I just poured the last of the thermos and slid it across the table, and we kept working. The morning of the second hearing, I woke up to a missed call. No voicemail. Just a number I didn't recognize with a Denver area code, logged at 6:14 a.m. I set the phone down, made coffee, and told myself it was nothing. By the time I'd pulled on my jacket and driven up the Ridge Road to the lodge, I'd almost convinced myself that was true. Reeve was in the meeting room when I arrived, arranging printed copies of her financial proposal in a neat stack at the head of the table. She was dressed differently than I'd seen her all week, dark blazer, hair pulled back, the composed and deliberate version of herself that she wore like armor when the situation required it. She looked up when I came in. "Harlan arrives at 9, she said. "The full board at 9:20. 20 minutes, I said. "That's enough." She nodded, but I could see it, the tightness around her eyes, the way she squared the papers twice when once would have been sufficient. I'd learned in 4 days that Reeve Weston did not show anxiety obviously. She just became very precise. I set up my laptop at the side table and pulled up the video files. 6 testimonials, edited simply, no music, no titles, just people talking in the spaces where they worked. I'd watched them enough times that I could have recited every word. I wasn't worried about the videos. I was worried about the missed call. Harlan Briggs arrived at 8:55. He was older than I'd expected from the way Reeve described him, early 70s, silver-haired, the kind of unhurried that belongs to someone who stopped needing to prove things a long time ago. He shook my hand with a firm, dry grip and looked at me with open curiosity. "You're the paramedic," he said. "Yes, sir. Reeve tells me you filmed the staff testimonials." "I did." He considered that. Interesting approach. He said it in a way that meant he'd already decided how he felt about it, and the feeling was not negative. He sat down across from Reeve and opened the proposal she'd sent him, printed, annotated in the margins in blue ink, which told me he'd read it more than once. They talked numbers for 12 minutes. Reeve was precise and unhurried, answering every question directly, not overselling. I stayed at the side table and stayed quiet, which is something I'm capable of when the situation genuinely calls for it. Then Harlan looked up from the pages and said, "Ashby is going to push the narrative that you're protecting legacy over performance." "I know," Reeves said. "He's been building that case with 3 of the newer board members for about 6 weeks." He paused. "I thought you should know the shape of it before they walk in." Reeves' expression didn't change, but something behind it did, a recalibration, fast and quiet. "How long have you known?" "Long enough." He folded his hands on the table. "I also know that your father sold this property under pressure from a short-term investor group in 2009. Different names, similar arithmetic." He looked at her steadily. "History has a habit of rhyming, Reeve. The question is whether you let it end the same way." The room was very quiet for a moment. It was then that my phone buzzed. Same Denver number. I stepped into the hallway and answered it. The voice on the other end was calm and professional and introduced itself as belonging to a financial compliance consultant named Greer. She told me that she'd been trying to reach someone connected to the Weston Lodge board review. She'd come across my name, apparently Danny had mentioned me to someone who'd mentioned me to her, and she had information she thought was relevant. Ashby, she said, held a quiet financial interest in a competing lodge property 40 miles south. Had held it for 14 months. It wasn't illegal on its own, but it hadn't been disclosed to the board, and in the context of a vote that would materially affect the Weston Lodge's competitive position, it was the kind of thing that tended to reframe a room. I stood in the hallway for about 10 seconds after the call ended. Then I went back in, crossed to Reeve, and told her quietly what I'd just heard. I watched her process it, the same fast, careful calculation I'd seen her run a dozen times in the past 4 days. She looked at Harlan. "Did you know about Ashby's interest in the Ridgeline property?" she asked. Harlan's expression shifted, something between confirmation and resignation. "I had a suspicion. Nothing documented." He looked at me. "Do you have documentation?" "I have a source who does," I said. "She's willing to put it in writing." Harlan was quiet for a long moment. Outside the meeting room windows the valley was brilliantly green, the morning sun cutting long and golden through the pines. Somewhere below us Cedar Falls was going about its Tuesday, coffee shops opening, the hardware store unlocking, Leon probably finishing his morning run along the river path. "All right," Harlan said finally. He closed the proposal and set both hands flat on the table. "Let's make sure this meeting goes the way it should." The board filed in at 9:20. Ashby came last, unhurried, already wearing the particular smile of a man who believes the outcome is settled. He took his seat, glanced at me with mild confusion, "Who's the civilian?" and opened his notebook. He had no idea what was already in the room. Reeve opened the meeting without preamble. She stood at the head of the table and laid it out, the financials first, clean and sequenced, the kind of presentation that doesn't ask for your belief so much as make disbelief inconvenient. Energy savings, vendor contracts, shoulder season projections. She moved through the numbers with the steady confidence of someone who has stopped hoping to be believed and simply decided to be correct. The newer board members, 2 men and a woman, all brought in during the last restructuring, listened with the polite, non-committal expressions of people who have already been told what to think. Ashby sat back in his chair with his pen uncapped, making occasional notes that I was fairly sure meant nothing. He had the specific patience of someone waiting for their moment. Reeve reached the end of her financial summary and said, "I'd like to show you something." She nodded to me. I started the first video. Maria filled the screen, her kitchen, her hands moving over the prep counter, her voice unhurried and specific. "The couple from Albuquerque. The green chili on the side. The wildflowers. Glad you made it." The room, which had been carrying the particular ambient noise of people performing attention, went genuinely quiet. Danny followed. Then the groundskeeper. Then the housekeeper with her birthday notes. One by one, 6 people who had no idea they were making an argument, they were just telling the truth about the work they did and why it mattered to them. That's all I'd ask them to do. It turns out that's enough, when you let people hear it plainly. When the last video ended, Harlan spoke before anyone else could. These people, he said, gesturing at the screen, are the asset. Without them, this property is a glass building on wet ground. He let that sit for a moment. The staff reductions are off the table for the quarter. I'm calling for a formal review of the proposal Reeve has submitted, with a vote at next month's full session. One of the newer members started to speak. Ashby cut in smoothly, that practiced, managing tone. Harlan, with respect, the board has already. There's also a disclosure matter, Harlan said. The room shifted. Not loudly. Just a degree or two, the way a room does when the temperature changes. Harlan looked at Ashby with the calm of a man who has been patient for 6 weeks and is now finished being patient. He outlined the ridgeline interest, the 14 months, the absence of disclosure. He didn't editorialize. He didn't need to. Ashby's pen stopped moving somewhere in the middle of it, and the practiced smile recalibrated into something careful and still. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Not with drama, with the quiet, conclusive deflation of an argument that has run out of ground to stand on. The newer members filed out first, then Carla, then the others, conversations dropping to murmurs in the hallway. Ashby left without looking at anyone, which told me everything about his understanding of how the morning had gone. Harlan shook Reeve's hand at the door. He held it a moment longer than necessary and said, "Your father would have liked to see this." Then he was gone. Reeve stood at the head of the now empty table. The morning light was doing something extraordinary through the tall windows, late May sun breaking through the last of the cloud cover in long golden strips across the wet valley below, the kind of light that makes ordinary things look like they've been chosen. She was looking out at it with her back to me, very still, and I had the sense that something in her had finally been set down after a long time of being carried. I crossed the room. Without saying anything, I picked her up the same way I had on Maple and Main 5 days ago, one arm under her knees, one at her back. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. "My ankle is significantly better," she said. "I know," I said. I carried her out through the lobby, past the front desk where Danny looked up and had the good sense to say nothing, past the tall windows where the golden light lay in long strips across the stone floor. Outside, I set her down at the low wall by the parking lot where the ridge dropped away into the valley. The air was clean and cold and smelled like rain and pine and the particular freshness that follows a week of May storms. Below us, Cedar Falls was small and quiet and exactly itself, the hardware store, the flower shop on Maple, the station where Leon was probably finishing paperwork. The cottonwoods along the river were the greenest they'd be all year. Reeve looked out at all of it with her shoulders finally down, and I stood beside her and let the quiet be what it was. Then she turned and kissed me. Or I kissed her. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure where one ended and the other began, which seems about right for how the whole week had gone. It was unhurried and certain, the kind of kiss that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. When we separated, she looked at the valley for another moment. Then, without looking at me, with a small and private smile that I knew I would spend a considerable amount of time thinking about in the weeks ahead, she said it. "I twisted my ankle. Can you carry me?" I looked at her. The sun was fully out now, the valley green and glittering below us, Cedar Falls going about its morning the way it always did and always would. "Only if you let me take you home," I said. She considered that for exactly 1 second. "Okay," she said. And that was that. Thanks for watching. If this story meant something to you, please like and subscribe for more unforgettable stories about love, resilience, and second chances.